And I will say welcome to our panelists and our attendees. My name is Olivia Morris, and I work for Metronet. With me today on the panel is Ann Walker-Smalley, the director of Metronet, and our fabulous panelists who are going to tell you all about what it's like to be a cataloging/metadata librarian, or whatever their specific titles are. And this is an area of librarianship I will freely admit I know almost nothing about. I, like many of you, had to take cataloging classes when I was in library school, and let's just say it was not my shining moment of library school. It wasn't my worst moment of library school, though. I'll tell you that story another time. So thank you for being here. This is the Real Life Librarianship series. This is our 7th week doing this, and it has been fantastically successful, and that is due mostly to our wonderful attendees who keep showing up to learn more about these library jobs. You can see on your screens the title card that is letting you know upcoming weeks. We have another one this year that will be on December 2nd, and that one is non-traditional librarians, which should be fun. We actually have a special guest who's joining us that night, Representative Mary Kunesh-Podine, who is a current, I guess, school media specialist who also works for the state of Minnesota government. So she's going to be speaking with us that night, along with a couple of other panelists, which should be fun. And then we're already planning out into 2021, so I hope you will keep coming back. As always, the evaluation is linked there on the title card, and I will send that out tomorrow to everyone who attended. So let us begin talking with our fabulous panelists. We always start with the same first question, which is, please introduce yourself. Tell us, what is your current job title? Where do you work? Where did you go to school? And then give us an overview of the path you took to get to where you are today. And I'm going to begin with Carmen today.
Hello, thank you. My name is Carmen Asleason, and I currently work at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. My official job title is Digital Metadata Librarian. And I got my master's in library and information science with a concentration in information organization from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And so my path to get to the University of St. Thomas started when I was a senior in high school. I was a shelver for my local public library. So I started there, and then throughout my undergrad, I worked at the library as a student worker. And then after graduation, was hired on as a full-time staff member for my undergrad library, and just kind of maintained that path of always trying to find a library, whether it was public or academic, until I finished my master's. And then I tried to focus on, finding a professional library position. And so that led me to a few places, and I ended up at St. Thomas. I've been there it'll be 4 years this March.
Great, thank you so much, Carmen. And David, tell us about yourself.
Get myself unmuted here. My name is David Norris. I am the cataloging and metadata librarian at St. Catherine University. I went to school, got my MLIS at St. Kate's. I finished in 2017. My path to librarianship has been sort of non-Euclidean. It's been all over the place. I started out, my undergraduate degree is in music composition. And from there, I ended up in various information management roles, eventually pointing me towards librarianship and then cataloging specifically. So I focused at St. Kate's on vocabularies and the information experiences of LGBTQ users.
Wow. I feel like I need you to draw me a map from music composition to cataloger. Like, it doesn't seem quite natural.
They're oddly related. I can go into it later if you like.
Okay, I'll let you touch on it later, but that's a new one. We've heard a lot of interesting backgrounds from people, but that's a first. So, and how about Sarah? Tell us about you, Sarah.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name's Sarah Ring, and I currently work at Minitex. And if you're not familiar with Minitex, we're a library network. I sometimes say library support organization. So we have many different services, and one of them is continuing education. And my current job title technically is continuing education librarian in the digital initiatives and metadata education unit. So I've never been able to come up with a great job title because it'd be too long. It'd be something like digital initiatives and metadata education librarian. But basically, I started at Minitex 2005, and I came from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation Library. And before that, I was in library school, went to library school in Madison at UW-Madison. And I was really interested in special libraries at the time and thought I'd go into special libraries. And if anybody's looked into it, I mean, those are kind of coveted positions. They're hard to find. And I lucked out because I think of Minitex as a type of special library. And so when I first started, my position was actually Bibliographic and Technical Services Coordinator. And back then we were the OCLC regional service provider. So any library in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota who used OCLC products, could be a cataloging product, it could be an interlibrary loan product, would go through us. And so it'd be everything from helping someone place an order for an OCLC product to, being the tech support. Like, I can't get a connection client to install, which was just rolling out around 2005, 2006. Anywhere from that to doing just general training on using the products, to general cataloging training, like copy cataloging, workshops, things like that. And then when OCLC centralized their services, we kind of had to reinvent our area at Minitex. And so we branched out, and that's when I started learning a lot more about providing support and training for library staff who were starting to build and manage and preserve digital content and digital collections.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I do believe that I forgot to say in my little introductory spiel that if you are attending this session and you have a question, please ask it. Our panelists would love to answer your questions. So either through the chat function or the Q&A are acceptable. So please don't hesitate, come forward with the questions. Meanwhile, let us move to question number 2, which is this: pretend that you are speaking with someone who has never heard of libraries before. Now, describe your job. Sarah, I'm going to let you tackle that one first.
This is one I had to think about a little bit. And I've tried to do this with family members before sometimes, so I've had a little bit of a practice, but so here goes. So I wrote this out so I remember it, but I'll say I help staff from all types of organizations in Minnesota to learn more about how to provide good online access to their collections, and in particular, their older unique materials they might hold at their organizations. And I teach standards for how to digitize those materials, standards for describing them so they can actually be searchable in a system so that people can actually find what they're looking for. And then the people that are interested in these types of collections are, teachers, students, researchers, genealogists, historians. So that's the best I could come up with.
I think that's great. I mean, I had an idea of what you do, but that kind of clarified it for me at least. So hopefully that helped our panelists as well. And Carmen.
So I always like to say to people that I make the invisible visible in my job. And so I take the information that describes a book or an image or some sort of like audio file, and I work with it so that others can find it, so that others can see it displayed in some sort of public way. And in my institution, I work with our institutional repositories and our digital collections. So I help that university content that's being made by students and faculty, I help get that out to the public, and I work with our archival collections that we've digitized and try to get those out into the public as well. I do work on more traditional cataloging tasks, or at least I call them traditional cataloging tasks, like working with physical materials and cataloging those things, and working with our streaming electronic video collections. But I kind of do a little bit of everything.
You make the invisible visible. That is a great explanation. I love that. They should use that in library schools.
Right?
Thanks, Carmen. And David.
The way I like to describe my role is something along the lines of knowledge Sherpa, or come up with a catchphrase. The broad shape of it is that I determine where things go in the library. That is ultimately what it boils down to. And then how I go about that is anticipating how people are going to search for those items then. When you have a question, I try to think about all the different ways that you are going to put those keywords into the search box, what's going to come up, and then the words themselves that we use to describe the resources. Yes, that someone who's completely unfamiliar with libraries, that's how I would describe cataloging in the most basic elemental way.
That's terrific. Honestly, if they'd used that when I was in library school, I probably would have done a little better in the class. That was very user-friendly, I thought.
A lot more fun than they teach it.
That's for sure. All right, so let's talk about the basics of these jobs. So for each of your institutions, talk to me about minimum qualifications and starting salaries. And you don't have to talk about your salary unless you are willing to, but just a ballpark estimate, what somebody could be making if they were doing a job like yours. And David, I'm going to begin with you.
The minimum qualification, of course, would be having an MLIS degree. So there's that entry point. For cataloging, familiarity with the MARC format. So the tools, the vocabularies, the schemas. Familiarity with databases helps a lot. Being able to organize the information as you're going about it. Let's see, starting salaries. I did a lot of research when I was being considered for this role. It's a mid 50,000, 5K is roundabout for kind of starting cataloging role.
That's great. Thank you so much. Sarah.
A lot of what David said. So I'm thinking back, I was like, what were the minimum qualifications when I started in 2005? But things have changed a little bit since then. But I would say definitely at least for a position in my area, would be the minimum qualification would be a degree in library and information science. Familiarity with cataloging standards like the MARC format, like David said. In 2005, it was AACR2, that was pre-RDA, the current cataloging standard. But if you're talking about description of digital content, it would be, if someone were posting my job right now, it'd probably be familiarity with things like Content DM as a system, because we use that, the Minnesota Digital Library, which is one half of my unit. That's that statewide digital library we run on Content DM. But also we have a custom front-end interface, which runs on some different software. So that would be thrown in there, I'm sure. But we would have, probably preferred qualifications as well as like required and that sort of thing. When I started in 2005, and university salaries are pretty public at University of Minnesota, so I'll just say it was 44,000 that I started at in 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Carmen.
same kind of thing, master's degree. My position was actually a newly created position when I applied for it. So they created it to kind of fit a need that they saw within their library organization. So it said, the MLIS, it said 3 years of library experience that included cataloging and metadata experience, as well as working with automated library systems. And I love the question in the chat, because that was me. That was all me trying to get a professional cataloging position and running into that same roadblock. And just to kind of answer, I found that I had to work my way up. I had to get positions that weren't cataloging, but were in the library. And then that's how I could make those connections with people. I could get onto projects that involved more cataloging skills to build the experience that people were looking for. I may not have had 2 years when I had my very first professional position, but I sold myself, and so they bought what I was selling until I could get those 2 years. And as far as salary, I would say around the same thing. When I first got hired and was kind of getting an idea of what this position should be offering for a salary, metadata was kind of still a new term, and it wasn't something that had been fully fleshed out yet for a lot of people. So I kind of had to base my idea off of looking at what a cataloging librarian would get. When I was looking at this today, it seemed like it's much more common to see metadata along. So it was a lot easier to find examples. So I've found ranges between 51K and 75K. And so I saw numbers around, like what Dave was saying, 50K, 55K for an average range for a position like this.
Good. And the question in the chat, which Carmen has already addressed, is that often it seems that jobs require a minimum of 2 years experience in cataloging. So are there suggestions? And Carmen, I loved your answer, but in case David or Sarah has any suggestions, are there suggestions to get qualified experience that without saying volunteer, because this person can't do that? So any other ideas on how you could break in without the experience? And I'll take whoever has an answer.
I can take a stab at it. As I was saying with in the intro, a lot of my roles were in information management. So as I was, let's say, I had the freedom to make my previous job what I wanted it to be or what I needed it to be. So as I was starting to look for cataloging jobs, I was looking at those job descriptions, cataloging job descriptions, and trying to tailor what I was doing towards what would be asked of me. So then in the job interview, in all the applications, I was able to draw correlations between here's what you're asking for, and here's what I have done. And here's how I can support that. So like Carmen was saying, you have to sell yourself. Sell your skills. It's all on how you phrase it. It's all on how you present it to the employer.
That's a great answer, and I think incredibly valuable across any position. I feel like that's what you should all be focusing on, is tailoring your skill set to what it is that you want to be doing. That's a wonderful answer. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not really. I mean, it's tough. Like if you're working full time and you're wanting to, in your current job, won't allow you necessarily to, if you're not in a library working that job full time, that would allow you to maybe do some cataloging. I know there definitely are some paid, there are paid internship type positions. I know the University of Minnesota Libraries has paid for those positions before. So I know they exist, but when you're already working full time, trying to fit in like an extra, 4 hours or 4 hours here, 4 hours there may not be feasible. So that's all I have to add to that.
That's all right. She's already said thank you in the comments. Please, Anne.
Just to clarify, each of you, none of the positions that you hold now are what we would call entry level. Is that correct? Because as Carmen said, hers required 3 years of experience. I don't know if anybody else mentioned the number of years, just to be clear. So, and I suppose you've got your experience, Sarah, at Department of Transportation, or
That definitely helped. There was kind of a gap when I was in library school that I held that position, and I continued on in that position before I was hired at Minitex. So that counted as like some post-degree experience. But yeah, I think things have changed now where position postings, at least within our area, would ask, they wouldn't be entry level, they would be asking for some experience, years of experience.
and we haven't really addressed this directly, but since each of you is an academic librarian, my experience having been on search committees at the University of Minnesota, the process there seems to be quite rigorous as far as vetting the initial application, resume, cover letter, and then the actual interview committee process. And then did you have to make a presentation? It takes forever. That's just an aside in my experience to get hired at the University of Minnesota. It's like, how does anyone ever get hired here in a reasonable amount of time? Remember in the last committee, one of the applicants said, I have been offered the job on my way home from the interview. And the head of the search committee said, yeah, that's not happening today. So just that process, I think, is an interesting one for people who haven't gone through it. And maybe you could briefly describe that.
Well, it's kind of like you have the questions in front of you, Anne, because the next question is quite literally, what is the hiring process for a job like yours? It was just like we planned that exactly. So
that was pretty good. We're on the same wavelength. Well, we've been doing this for a while. Anyway.
So let's talk a little bit about the hiring process, if you wouldn't mind telling us. So let's start with David.
We're lucky because we had a couple rounds of job interviews, hiring processes the past couple of, nope, not the past couple of months, because I'm thinking in COVID time. It was last year. We had 3 positions, and I was on one of the search committees. So aside from the application part of the process, which as you are applying for positions, fill out everything, read the entire job description, read what we are asking from you, and send it, include it in the application. Probably about 30% of the applications we received, we ended up having to throw out because they weren't complete. But phase 2, it's different every time because we try to tailor the in-person interview portion of our search process to the role. So we look at what the job has entailed in the past, what we're hoping it will be in the future, what our current needs are. And then we tailor those questions to the candidate. And we see how they answer them, how excited they are, the passion that they show for the work that they hope to be doing in the role. And then if they make it past that part, we get to the presentation where we ask them to present on something. It's always open-ended, which drove me crazy, but it's good. To present a product or a process that is pertinent to their field, that they think would be of benefit to the St. Gates community. And we look specifically at that, at how they tailor their presentation and their responses to the questions to the university culture, because that tells us that they know something about us and that they're really interested in coming to work with us at the library.
That's a great question. I like that. And Carmen.
Yeah, so you're correct in that, yes, for whatever reason, academic interviews for professional positions are multiple hours of an interview. They are the longest ones I've ever had. And I don't know, ironically enough, this one for St. Thomas was the longest one that I've had to go through yet. I think it was between 4 to 5 hours. It was the whole morning. I had multiple interviews with different groups of people. I had some with my department. I had one with the actual hiring committee. I had one with the entire library staff, and that's where they had asked me to do a presentation about some topic regarding metadata. I had one-on-one conversations with the person who would be my supervisor, as well as the library director. So it was a lot of talking. It was a lot of talking. It was. After I left, I just thought, wow, like, why am I so tired? But I find that it's not uncommon for academic positions to have those long interviews. I've interviewed for jobs in public libraries as well, and those are very much, here's my questions, here's your answers. Okay, sweet, thank you. Have a nice day. We'll let you know. And there's no follow-up, there's no second interview, none of that kind of stuff. It's very straightforward. And I think that has to do a lot with the hiring that's done. And a lot of these public libraries are county owned or they're city owned, so they have to follow a different set of guidelines for their hiring process than an academic library might have to follow.
Thanks, Carmen. And Sarah?
Well, Minitex is part of the University of Minnesota Libraries, so we follow their process. So it's exactly what David and Carmen described. I mean, not to be redundant, so I won't expound on that, but it's what you would expect from an academic library.
Okay, thank you so much.
Very long. The day, I mean, I was on the search committee, and at the end of the first day, I thought, why am I so tired? You know, I just had to listen and participate. But I also want to say that one of the jobs had 75 applicants, which meant we had to read in detail 75 cover letters and 75 applications. And here's a piece of advice. If you're applying for a job this was for a Minitex job at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities, do not begin your cover letter with, I'm applying for the job of science librarian at the University of Minnesota, Duluth, because that makes everything easy for the search committee, you know. And the other thing is, maybe you can comment on this too. You know, everything you read about applying for a library job, whether it's a public library or a special library or whatever, it's you know, brief in your cover letter. There were 7 and 9 page cover letters for these academic library jobs, and it's like, okay, I'm reading to page 2 and then I'm done, which that's on me, but that just seems like too much, particularly since it wasn't new information. It wasn't, as David was saying, selling yourself, or Sarah was saying, selling yourself, you know, okay, these are the requirements. This is my whatever. It was just repeating what was on the application or the CV. So that's a piece of free advice from somebody who's had to read these brief, you know. I mean, it doesn't have to be 2 paragraphs, but it certainly shouldn't be 9 pages either.
I've got 15 years in the field, and everyone here has read my emails. I'm wordy. We all know that. This is, you know, and I don't think I could write a 9-page cover letter if I tried. I mean, what could possibly be in that?
Well, and I've been a librarian longer than some of you have probably been alive, and I couldn't write a 9-page cover letter, or I wouldn't write a 9-page cover letter. So I just think, you know, think of the committee. It's not only you that we're evaluating, and you are being evaluated against everybody else, you know. So if the best thing about you is on page 9, sorry, I missed it. So.
And we just got a question in the Q&A from Violet Fox. Hi, Violet. Welcome. So Violet would like to know what Carmen, David, and Sarah have what your thoughts are on how we can support Black, Indigenous, and people of color as part of your jobs in cataloging and metadata. So if you'd like to speak to that, and I know we're not prepared for this one, so anyone who has an answer, feel free.
I can start. Just because we've been talking about it a lot lately. So thanks for the question, Violet. So I mentioned that part of my unit is the Minnesota Digital Library, the statewide database that collects content from and provides access to it from over 200 organizations. So all types of cultural heritage organizations contribute. And one thing that it's in our strategic plan to start to work on being really what's the word? I'm blanking. Coming to the end of the day here. We're really trying to work on not only diversifying the committees that oversee Minnesota Digital Library and the staff, but also look at our collections and what can we do to start to have conversations with organizations that we've never talked with before, or maybe and maybe they have great content, very content unlike we've ever seen for Minnesota Digital Library that would help tell Minnesota's story. And so we just did a call in our latest call for content. We're asking for, we do a general call every year where we ask for people to submit proposals to contribute to the collection. So anybody can fill out an application, and any organization, and basically if it's of and about Minnesota, you can apply. But we're making a really targeted call to try to get at even more diverse content and work with organizations that we haven't worked with yet, and just start those conversations. And it's more my coworkers who are doing that work. I'm with them and helping with their projects, but Molly Huber in particular knows a lot more about that. So it's just something we're doing with on the content side, but also I know that one of my colleagues has been working on creating also things like difficult content statements for different parts of the collection as well. So we're starting that work, and we've been talking about it for a long time, but now we're starting that work. So those are just a few things that come to mind.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you so much. Go ahead, David.
This is very relevant to the work that we're doing at St. Kate's right now. We've gone through a couple of anti-bias, anti-racist trainings in the past couple of months at St. Kate's. So this has been on our minds a lot. In working to combat colonization, particularly in the language and the collections that we have. One of the first indications that I had of this was that some of my colleagues have what we call an old dead white guys list as a place to potentially start weeding as we go through. So as I said in the beginning, my focus is on vocabulary and decolonizing vocabulary. One of the projects that I have been working on for a while is getting illegal aliens out of our subject headings and replacing that with undocumented immigrants. I think that's a huge thing to do, to take a hard, close look at the words that we use and how they affect minority, non-white, non-cisgendered people in our communities. And that involves taking a look at who is in our communities and who is being left out, who is being put off by the words we use in descriptions, in our subject headings. Collections wise, one of the things that we're starting to do is incorporate the own voices movement, the hashtag movement, into the decisions that we're making. And one of the MLIS professors at St. Kate, Sarah Park-Golan, has been doing a lot of this work in specifically Korean American literature, Asian American literature, in seeing how many books are written by non-Asian authors in representing particularly life for children in these books, and having them not accurately reflected in the books that they read. So we're really making a concerted effort to introduce books into our collection that meet those criteria, that are written by the people whose life they're representing on the pages. That's a little bit.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. Carmen, would you like to share anything?
Yeah. I'm going to piggyback on David because both St. Thomas and St. Kate's are part of the same library consortium. And so we get to share our bib records for our physical materials. And so the work he talks about with the subject headings, we also get to help and partake in that too, and work off of what he's been able to do.
I'll say, Mark Ellert at St. Thomas, like that would not have happened without him and Carmen.
That is true.
So Carmen, you were instrumental in making this happen. So thank you.
You guys get to do the what I call the fun work, the actual changing and seeing that change. They get to do that work. So, but then we are also at St. Thomas. A couple of professors have started the George Floyd and Anti-Racist Street Art digital collection, and so they have really been doing wonderful work with that. And when I heard of it, I reached out to them to see what library resources we could use to help preserve that content that they are gathering. So we're going to start those conversations to work with that project and just to bring awareness to everything and help them understand that the library is here to help with some of this stuff and help with preserving the materials. As far as kind of our physical collection, I know there's over time, call numbers have been used with letter and number combinations that haven't evolved as the subject headings themselves have evolved. So there's always projects to go back and kind of reclassify some things so that it just is better and it's more appropriate to reclassify items. So we have those kinds of projects that I'm hoping to start at my institution.
Okay. And now the questions are coming in fast and furious. You guys have caught their attention, so congratulations. And the next question from Molly is that she's curious about subject headings. David hinted that they are working on their subject headings, and she wants to know, don't you have to use what Library of Congress dictates?
The answer is no. We don't have to. LC is preferable because that's what the majority of academic libraries are going to use. So that helps with the collocation, that helps with resource discovery. What we ended up doing with the illegal alien subject headings, for example, is Mark created a whole slew of authority records to replace that correspond to different instances and variations on illegal aliens. So each one of those includes that old subject heading in the 450s, the unauthorized references. So that link is not lost. What I will say here is that I belong to the troublesome catalogers school of kind of bucking trends and bucking tradition a little bit within reason. From my standpoint, the language that we use needs to reflect where we are as a culture and as a society. And it needs to reflect the values of social justice in how we talk about people and how we talk about things. So if we need to create a subject heading and use that locally in our catalog, I personally, I think that we need to. In carrying on the work of Sanford Berman in decolonizing and really critically taking a look at our subject headings and our vocabularies.
Carmen or Sarah, anything you'd like to add to that?
I'm a troublemaker too. Those are my favorite kind of librarians.
No, just that, I mean, from our perspective, we support and try to, for example, Minitex just held, well, not just, this was months ago, months ago already, but we hosted a virtual viewing of the documentary Change the Subject, which was about students at Dartmouth, how they exposed, came upon the subject heading in the library catalog, and was like, what is this? and kind of started to ask questions and work with the library staff. And there's a larger story than that. I'm really simplifying it, but so Minitex is definitely supports, tries to support library staff who and troublesome catalogers, and so we're more on that side of it. So I don't have a lot to add to what David and Carmen have been talking about, because we don't have a local catalog where we can do this with our own data necessarily. But lots of libraries are looking at doing that in Minnesota, flipping that particular subject heading, illegal aliens, to undocumented immigrants or another term. Because it hasn't been changed at the Library of Congress yet. So
great. And definitely support for you rebels in the chat from Lisa Gearman. She just wants you to know she's a big. We do have another question here. Laura would like to know from Carmen and David, how will your subject heading project change as you merge with MinPals?
Carmen, you got this one?
Yeah, well, I hope so. My answer to this is that, the data is going to come with us, because what's happening is we're both on the same systems, and so our data is just going to go into their system, but it's going to get connected in a kind of a different way. It's a whole thing. But I think we have to start those conversations with MinPals and help them see what we've been doing, how we're maintaining it, and working with them to try to get the rest of their catalog on the same page and doing the same kind of work. I think if all else fails, the changes that we have made, we're going to make sure that they do come over, even if they have to be local and only for our St. Thomas view. If they can only see those changes at the moment, that's fine. But the goal is to get them in on this change as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Keep the questions coming, attendees. These have been great questions. Meanwhile, we'll continue with the ones that I've got for you. So our next question is, why did you choose this particular library track? So I want to know, why did you all become catalogers as opposed to becoming a different type of librarian? What led you to do this? So let's go with Sarah.
I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but my interest was always early on in special libraries. So Minitex I looked at as a special library in that we don't have a collection, although now Minnesota Digital Library is a digital collection that we, but it's not our, we don't own those things. We just provide access to them for organizations. So But as I soon learned, once I started the position, I feel like I am a pretty detail-oriented person, and I love getting into the back end of things and looking at data. And so, I mean, I kind of knew that through library school and the types of courses I took at the time. Like there was a database course and a GIS course, and so I knew I was kind of attracted to the technical side of library work as well. So it kind of, those two things I would say, like knowing I wanted to go more into the data technical side and also the special library side.
Great. Sarah, thank you so much. David.
Why did I choose cataloging? I would say more the cataloging chose me. In hindsight, because hindsight is everything, I have been doing something like this all of my life. As a child, I was reorganizing my bookshelves by author, title, genre. I've been thinking about that forever, of how knowledge is organized. Track-wise, pretty much the minute that I started the MLIS program, I knew I had found my people. I went in initially planning to pursue an archives track. I'm very interested in historical preservation as well. But discovering that there are people who thrive on dealing with minutia and levels of mundanity that cause most other people's eyes to roll back in their heads. Those are my people. That there's this whole metadata schema, Mark, that you can pretty much find a field for anything. You can describe everything maybe with some tweaks in these fields. So there was no question for me.
Wonderful. And since you brought up archiving, I will say that our panel right before this, 2 weeks ago today, we talked to a group of archivists who were fascinating. And I have just linked in the chat, that is the link to our YouTube channel where all of our previous sessions are hosted. And this one will be hosted there probably tomorrow, as soon as we get it uploaded. But if anyone is interested in our previous sessions, you can view them at that link. And Carmen.
David, I feel like you're my spirit animal right now. Like you're saying. I often joke with people, but I'm more serious than joking, that I'm the librarian who doesn't read. So if people ask me, what book should I read? What I couldn't tell you. My go-to is always whatever James Patterson is writing, because that's pretty much, but so for me, that whole idea of traditional reference and reader's advisory, it didn't really excite me. But for whatever reason, problem solving, and I had it in my head when I was an undergrad that I was going to do computer science, because Hackers was a really big movie around those times. And I was like, yeah, I could do all that, type it on the computer, it'd be great. Coding is not my strong point, but I feel like I found like a wonderful happy medium where I still get to work with a lot of technology. I still have to understand how computers work and how software works, but I don't have to code it just yet.
These are great answers. Okay, so talk to me about a typical day, or if there's no such thing, which I hear a lot. That's the common answer to this, is that there is no such thing. Tell me about an atypical day. I want to know, what does it mean to do your job? What are you actually doing to fill your time? So, Carmen, I'm gonna let you tackle this one first.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, the boring stuff is, I start my day by checking emails. I check to see what kind of fires have ignited while I've been away for the 12 hours or whatever it ends up being. If something has kind of risen in priority level versus what I've set for my priorities, I kind of tackle that kind of stuff first. And then I look at if I have content that I need to import into our systems, maybe we've got new streaming videos that have come through, so I need to get those records into the system, or maybe I'm working on some sort of project for some digital materials and I need to start ingesting that content or checking the metadata around it. And so I'll do a lot of that. With our library migrating to the new consortium, we have a lot of cleanup projects around our data to try to get that as clean as possible before we copy it over to the new area. So there's meetings upon meetings about that and projects that we're working on for just regular database maintenance stuff that I find is very satisfying, but can also be a lot to deal with. I would say an atypical day for me is probably when something breaks. So if all of a sudden links have stopped working to our electronic content, maybe a platform has gone down and so people can't get to articles or ebooks, then you're kind of troubleshooting things and making sure that it's not on your end that's the problem, that it's on something else. And or if the internet goes down, it does happen sometimes. But I would say that's probably what my atypical day looks like.
Terrific. Sarah.
Well, I guess I spend most of my time planning and presenting and hosting training and events for staff and for metadata staff, for digital initiative staff. I spend a lot of time learning and trying to just keep up to date on all the new changes to standards that are out there and any new projects, new research in the field. So I do a lot of that. That's more typical. But it leaves a little room for me to actually work on any of my own projects. So I usually jump at the chance of being able to work on any sort of pilot project or anything with another library, because it doesn't happen very often. But I would say an atypical day is one in which I do get to create metadata or enhance metadata for digital content. And so like next week, things slow down a little bit. There's going to be a lot of people that are taking a little bit of vacation time around the Thanksgiving break. And I'm hoping I'll be able to go back to this project that's just always on the back burner, but it's one that I learned from a lot. And that is this Minitex oral history project that every so often I'll interview a staff person in the region, sort of like this, but just kind of capturing the moment and then taking those. So hopefully I'll be probably combing through, fixing some transcripts because those are all transcribed, completing the technical and the descriptive metadata for those objects, and then uploading them into our content DM instance. And so I love it when I get a chance to like actually do some of that stuff. And this week it's been all about we're slowly enhancing the web portal instance of the Minnesota Digital Library, which is right now called Minnesota Reflections. So this week it's been all about working with a developer to create the advanced search page, which we haven't had an advanced search for a couple of years. So what do we want to include in advanced search? And it's going through that. So maybe next week when it's slow too, I'm kind of Minitex's unofficial archivist. So whenever there's a slow time, I'll often go back and try to upload some of our older organizational kind of founding documents into the University of Minnesota's Digital Conservancy. We have a big anniversary coming up, our 50th. So I know we're going to want to refer back to some of that content and have it accessible. So that's more atypical, but I love it when I have like a little time to do some of that, because often what I'm doing is planning and presenting training. So
that's great. I will say, Sarah, the number of times you said next week when it's slow, I feel like now your next week isn't going to be anything but slow because you've piled so many projects into it.
I mean, like with meetings, like there's not going to be as many people around for meetings.
You'll be overwhelmed next week. And David.
Just to echo what Carmen said, my days often start out with email correspondence, figuring out what fires there are today, what's broken today, what new content is suddenly available and dumped on my desk today. But largely my days are shaped by kind of what's happening at the library, both macro and micro. Because we've revamped our academic master plan this year. So some of those changes are starting to trickle down to the library level. So figuring out what that means for us and how that affects what I do. This is the content ingestion, whether it's streaming media, getting through copy cataloging, getting through my backlog, which never ends. Someone comes in and like, oh, I have these collection of festschrifts. We'd like to put it in the catalog. You know, like, and I love festschrifts. Anytime I get to catalog one is a very, very good day because I love the word. And there's my running list of enhancements that I'm constantly going through, enhancing table of content notes, adding descriptions, finding missing ISBNs in records, which I often hear about through some of our CERC folks, where they couldn't find something, like, oh, well, that's because there wasn't an ISBN for you to find because it wasn't in the record. So I look for a lot of those things. And then, as Carmen said, we are merging with MinPals. So there is the catalog cleanup that we're doing as part of that. So I try to fit that into my day as much as I can. At the same time, we're also wrapping up the merging of our Minneapolis and St. Paul libraries and all of the chaos that resulted as part of that. So I'm currently working on flipping over all of our journals from Minneapolis to St. Paul and merging the holding records, which I'm having to do manually because somewhere along the way we stopped keeping track of what we have. So now that gets to be part of my world. Yeah, to go back a little bit to Violet's question. One of the enhancements that I'm working on is getting rid of all the instances of N4, the N4 cutter in our catalog, which for anyone who doesn't know, N stands for Negro. Because in 2020, we are still using that word in our citations, in our subject heading captions. So I've created a whole set of new classes to replace the collection. I've got through everything but the P's, and the P's are going to take me about a year, roundabout. Atypical, fixing things. Currently, we're trying to get our libguides to import into Alma, and they're not, and we don't know why, and it's driving us crazy. Recently, I also created a bunch of training videos for our student workers because now they're having to do things that they wouldn't normally have to do because we're shorthanded. And I don't have 20 student workers to, I can pull one of them off to put book jackets on all of our hardcovers, our book covers on all of our hardcovers with jackets. So I'm having to do a lot of those things.
Wow. I will say Violet just left a note in the comments that there's an article she wants you to read or information about changing that N4 cutter number. So for anyone who is paying attention. And then I have a question that I don't, it's not on our question list. So you've all talked to various degrees about improving the catalog, making changes, upgrading. Is there ever a perfect? Is it ever work that can be done, or is it always going to be something that you can fix?
You can always fix it.
Okay.
No, I don't think it'll ever be done, right? Because I think the way most of the academic libraries get their information is from someone else, right? You get OCLC records, which are created from someone else and then added to by other people, sometimes correctly, sometimes not. So the data is always changing. And depending on how you are working with that, your answer can vary. If you're going to take a snapshot of that data at one time, then yeah, maybe you can say that it's going to be done because you're never going to update it, you're never going to change it. But if you're constantly changing your data, you're going to constantly have to keep reevaluating it and making sure that things are lining up the way that you need them to.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say for metadata for digital collections side, I mean, I feel like it never ends, especially for our metadata librarian, Greta Bonneman, who does the majority of the work for the Minnesota Digital Library. And she's always at least going back to enhance the records. And just when we think like the collection's looking good, something will come along like the rightstatements.org work, which is, if you're not familiar with it, is a collaborative that came up with 12 standard right statements, essentially how to describe the thing in terms of copyright. So if something's in copyright, has no copyright, or other are the three big categories, but there are 12 statements that they think any organization could use. And adoption's been really slow, but all of a sudden we're looking at our working with 200 organizations to retrospectively go back and replace all of the custom rights statements that organizations have created for their content. And it's all not for the organizations, it's for the people using and searching and wanting to view that data and know what they can do with it, and just being more apparent with what's the copyright status of this item I'm looking at to know how they can use it. And so that was like something that just happened, and we're like, whoa, this is a huge project all of a sudden. And so we'll be doing that for probably many years.
All right. David, anything you wanted to add?
I agree with everything that Carmen and Sarah have just said. The one thing I would add is, yes, I agree that everything can be fixed. 2, you don't have time to necessarily get to everything. So the challenge is figuring out what your priorities are. For example, at St. Kate's, we have our juvenile collection, but then we also have this other donated collection that is not browsable. No one can access it, but it's a collection of children's books. And there's a lot of crossover between the juvenile and that collection. So at some point, we would like to deduplicate both of those, combine them, figure out what needs to go in the Sawyer collection. It's a whole thing. But as Sarah was saying, that's a multi-year project. But figuring out what time, what resources we have available to us, using that to set our priorities, it's hard because we want to do everything, but we can't. We can't yet. We can't right now. Someday.
Okay. This is always a fun question. What is the best thing about your job? And what is the worst thing about your job? Sarah.
Was that because I was smiling?
Yeah, you smiled when I said it, which meant you had an answer for half that question.
Okay. I think the best thing is just the variety. And that's what I've always loved about this job. And it's just because I get to work with all types of library staff, and not just library staff, but also staff at cultural heritage, other types of cultural heritage organizations. And so the work is very varied in that sense. And what I'm working on, one day is totally different the next day. So I've always enjoyed that a lot. And one other thing I love is that I'll read like a research paper or a new project, and I get to think about, okay, what can we do on a local level to learn more about this? Or on a statewide level to learn more about this, or how is this going to impact libraries? And then maybe even do an experiment with other libraries to learn, how does this work? And my best example is with linked data, which has been a thing that we've been talking about. I've been talking about at least since 2011, 2012. And so I love that, is that I can read about something or see something coming, and then experiment and learn more about that thing. The worst is probably, I just sometimes miss working with a physical collection. And Minitex, we're in offices, and right now most of us are still working from home, but so sometimes I miss that, like even like day-to-day processing stuff that I remember doing. So I miss that sometimes.
Okay. David.
Get me to unmute. I'm really having to think about the worst thing about my job. Right now, the worst thing about my job would probably be, like Sarah was saying, not having regular access to the collection. Because that's where the majority of my work comes from, is walking through the stacks and happening to come across something that catches my eye. And then that leads me down a rabbit hole. It leads me to a whole other project. So I don't get to do that as often as I would like. If I had to say anything, it's probably, I'm really struggling to come up with something that I don't like about my job.
That's probably a good thing, right?
Meetings, I'm not a big fan of meetings. I would rather, just plug away at things and not have my entire morning eaten up with Zoom meetings now. That's not great. Favorite things about my job. I love like those moments of kismet when I have this. And this is another thing that I miss about being in the physical library space, having a chance meeting with a colleague in the hallway who says, "Oh, I happen to have," this actually happened, "I happen to have this collection of art exhibition catalogs that were donated to us. Well, can we get those out on the shelves?" I said, "Ooh, let me take a look at them." And we did. And so many of those conversations have resulted in really fun projects that I've got to collaborate on with my fellow librarians. And I don't get to do that now, which makes me sad. But my ultimate favorite, the ultimate number one thing about my job is the satisfaction of people being able to find what they're looking for. If no one is complaining that they can't find something in the catalog, I know I'm doing my job.
That's a great answer. Carmen.
Yeah, I would say my answer is probably the same for both, because more often than not, people just don't understand what metadata is and why it's important. So you always have that conversation with people where you can help them understand what it is, help them not be so overwhelmed by it. Because I've also found too that when you say metadata, they just don't know what you're talking about. It's a little much. And so having those conversations just to explain what it all is and helping them ease into it is very rewarding. But then it can also be, you just find yourself saying the same things over and over again. You just don't know if it's sticking. So that can be a little frustrating.
Okay, great. The next question on the list you probably all looked at and thought, what does she mean by social media ? And the answer to that is I did not realize that I had not finished that question before I sent you the question list. So kudos. But that actually came up in a couple of previous chats. People were talking about their relationship to their job in social media. And I thought, that'd be something worth asking in this day and age is, do you use social media as part of your job? Is it a requirement? Is it something you choose to do? How does it impact your job? Is it a benefit? I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. So I'm just going to let you talk a little bit about your relationship with social media. And David, I know you're very important to social media. It's how we found you. So please, why don't you go first?
Oh, I wish I were better about it. It takes time to really engage on Twitter, especially, which is where you found me. I find that the majority of my engagement with social media comes from encountering other people's posts. I encounter Violet Fox's posts a lot, and they get me thinking about things that I hadn't considered before. It's a really double-edged sword. There have been a lot of wonderful conversations that I've been a part of on Twitter, where I've been able to connect with colleagues in different parts of the state, different parts of the world, who I've met at conferences. And we finally know what each other look like. Probably the other piece of social media that I use is a Facebook group that I belong to called Troublesome Catalogers and Meddlesome Metadata Fairies. I think that's the title. That has been an incredible resource because someone will post a question and within 2 minutes there are about 10 responses of ideas, suggestions for fixes. It's wonderful. So it's a really engaged community. It's finding how social media works for you. That is the challenge.
Great, thank you. Carmen.
I have such a love-hate relationship with social media that I feel in a way I'm lucky that I don't have to be responsible for it in my position. The library does have a team of people that is responsible for all the social media stuff that the library does. So I know that when I do want to use those platforms to reach out about the digital collections we maybe have digitized or some of the new things that we've got coming up, I can reach out to them and let them work their magic.
Okay. And Sarah.
I used to be way more active on Twitter, but I guess I'm still kind of on my break period because I used it a lot early on, running organizational accounts and my own, and I kind of just got burned out, to tell you the truth. So I'm still kind of in my break period, but one day I'll be back and more active. But I really appreciate the people who are out there posting great content, and Violet Fox was mentioned already, but and the Crit Cat hashtag is a great one to follow, critical cataloging. And so mostly I use Twitter like around conferences. Like if I'm attending a conference, I like to see what the conversation is, or even if I'm not there, I use it that way a lot.
Well, and I want to say on Sarah's behalf, she isn't taking credit for this, but Minnesota's virtual library legislative week owes a lot to Sarah and her expertise with social media. She sort of set up our structure on how to reach out and helped identify the handles for the legislators and all that. And since legislative week in 2021 will be 100% virtual, Minnesota Library Association and IDEM owe a lot to Sarah for building that foundation around social media. So maybe she's in her break period now, but not then.
Thanks, Anne.
I would agree. And also thank you to Violet, who is helping us out in the chat. She has posted the link to the Troublesome Catalogers and Magical Metadata Fairies Facebook group, as well as those hashtags for CritCat and CritLib. And I would just like to say to any of the panelists and attendees, if you would like to post your personal handles or your work handles or your professional handles in there for people to follow, as well as our attendees, if you would like people to follow, you're welcome to put those in there and share that in the chat. So, see, that was a fun little experiment in social media. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is there a specialized skill set that is needed for your job outside of what we consider typical library skills? If so, did you have it before getting this job or learn afterward? And are there any special degrees, licenses, or certifications that are needed to do your job? Carmen.
So I guess the short answer, I guess I would say is yes. But I don't think it necessarily comes from a certificate in any kind of way. I think, and this is great that you said this, Olivia, because I wrote this down, and this is almost like proving my point to myself, that I often hear librarians say that they hated their cataloging class when they took it, and they didn't like it, and it wasn't the one for them, and they are also not, the catalogers or the metadata librarians. And so I think you really have to kind of enjoy that process of breaking something down to its bare minimum and then putting it back together in a different way. And we work with so many standards that kind of dictate this minimum level of how things should be displayed. And it's super important to have that, but then you have to kind of understand what all of those standards are and where they work and where they don't quite work. And so I've learned, I'm trying to think, where am I going with this one? So I feel like you learn about those standards in library school, but you don't necessarily get to really work with them until you're out of library school.
Thank you. Sarah.
I guess I would just say I feel like I didn't learn a lot on the job post library school, and similar to what Carmen was saying, I mean, systems change, standards change and evolve. A lot has changed since I started in 2005. So, I'm just trying to keep up and educate myself so that I can educate others, basically. And that, I mean, I would say, we already said, at a minimum, we needed the library degree for this position. But beyond that, I've taken a lot of certificate courses. And when I was learning about linked data, I did the Library Juice Academy's certificate. I forget the full name of the certificate, but it was a lot of learning XML and other linked data technologies. And it was like a 6-course thing. That was really helpful for learning more about digging into the technical side of linked data. Right now, I'm taking some more archives courses through the Society of American Archivists, because I do training related to preserving digital content, and I've always worked in libraries, and so I felt like I need to know a little more about, on the archive side of things, how they're dealing with, taking in digital content into their archives, managing it and preserving it. And so I just felt like that was kind of a gap that I needed to fill to learn more about that, just having worked in libraries my whole life. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. And David linked, while you were speaking, Sarah, he linked the Library Juice Academy certificates list. So for any of our attendees, that link is in the chat as well. And David.
What to add to that? I don't know if you could call it necessarily a skill. Curiosity is probably the number one thing you need as a cataloger. And it's this sort of ineffable, undefinable sense of, you know, having that big picture when it comes to metadata and to resource description. And this is where I'm so glad that computers can't do this, because it means that they aren't ready yet to rise up and take over. Of creating the links between one resource and another, between one idea and another, that you can establish with metadata. So, you know, even as I am also not a reader as much as I would like to be, I'm not. I'm a fantastic skimmer. So I know the gist of what I'm describing. But being able to form those links, of being able to form a picture of being able to define the web of information that you are maintaining. I don't know if any of that made sense.
It did. And I would absolutely concur that I think curiosity ought to be a skill. Even if they don't define it that way, it sure should be, especially in this profession.
I also think what David said really is a summary of what being a librarian of any type is. It is that ability to be curious about, if you're doing reference or reader's advisory, being curious about why that person wants to know that, the whole reference interview or whatever, but also having that universal picture of making those connections. I mean, we are the people who know what all the pieces, most of the pieces of the puzzle are that other people don't have. So we can make that connection. They have one specific question, but they don't have a view of what, as David said, is that web of information where we can put them in the right little nodule and open their worlds for them. So, I mean, that to me, you know, when people say, you know, oh, I became a librarian because I like to read, that's really not the criteria I'm looking for. I'm looking for those people who are curious and make those connections.
I would concur. And I think it's interesting too, as I've been listening to our panelists talk today, and I've been thinking in my own mind, it's amazing that we would all say, you know, we're librarians, and yet my job is literally nothing like yours. I would flounder if I was tossed in your positions, as you might as well if you were in mine. But yet at the core of it, it is, as Anne said, we're all in the same place. We're all helping make those connections and being curious about information and how to connect people and words. So yeah, it's part of the reason why this series is so much fun. We get to see these connections on a larger scale.
Why being a librarian is so cool.
Yes, that as well.
You know, all the pieces we have, you know, Olivia and I have been to I've missed one, but all the rest. Just how fascinating the whole big picture of librarianship is and who does it. And I just have to say this because, as I said before, I have been a librarian a really long time. When I went to library school, OCLC was a twinkle in Ohio libraries' eyes. I went to library school in Ohio, and we were lucky that we had an OCLC terminal at that point, because they thought, oh, okay, this is the wave of the future. And I eventually went to work at the State Library of Ohio, which really invested a lot of money in what at that time was the Ohio College Library Center. So cataloging pre-OCLC was way different. Just wanted to bring that up. And pre-databases of any sort.
All right. So let's talk briefly about professional organizations for your job. And do you belong to them? And if so, what benefit does this add to your job? And I will begin with David.
Um, there are professional organizations for technical services. ALCTS is the one that comes to mind. I hope I have that right. Just as a resource for networking, finding colleagues, delving further into your profession, I suppose is one way. Networking is probably the number one reason why you should belong to a professional organization. This is controversial. I'm really split on ALA. For so many reasons. I find that the smaller ones, the smaller ones where you can actually get to know people, those have more value than something gargantuan like ALA. MLA is a fantastic resource. Oh Lord, I wasn't anticipating this question. I guess I will give a shout out to the AutoCAT listserv, which that's how I envision what a professional organization should be. It is very active. It is very lively. It is a wealth of information. I feel like I've learned more from AutoCAD, not necessarily more than I learned in library school, but I have learned how cataloging works in real life, in day to day, from that particular listserv. So listservs are also a great resource in addition to professional organizations.
Wonderful. And Violet has posted the AutoCAD list in the chat today, and I feel like Violet deserves a gold star for her performance as an attendee today. I'm sure you all agree with me. Carmen.
Yeah, I'm kind of along with what David was saying. I think for me, I kind of look at those listservs as more of my professional organizations than I do the ones that I need to pay to be a part of. I know with our library system, there's a massive community of people who are on the same system. And so there's listservs dedicated to different aspects of that. So you have all of that collaboration that's happening and all of those making. So yeah, I think for me, I'm mostly involved with a lot of listservs versus professional organizations, for better or for worse.
Thank you. Sarah?
I would say MLA, the Minnesota Library Association, I've gotten the most value out of, and I think David already kind of mentioned it, but it's, Minnesota, and it's smaller than ALA. I've always been an ALA member, and the value I see with ALA, I guess I think of almost like I'm investing in, like, I think of the advocacy work that ALA does in Washington, and that piece stands out to me the most. And so I feel like I'm like kind of investing in ALA to do advocacy for libraries, and that's one thing that still connects me to ALA. And I do get a lot out of the programming that comes out of their conferences. They do have some great sessions that I've gone to, and all of the cataloging and metadata update sessions. And now some, like, I haven't been following along as much lately. Maybe somebody can chime in on the new acronym, but they've combined some divisions. So the LIDA group, which was the Library and Information Technology division, has combined with ALETS, the Association of Library Collections and well, it's the technical services folks. That division have combined also with the leadership group, I think. So now it's core. Thank you. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
Violet's got the equation in the chat.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I was actually
core.
really happy to see that, because I found there was tons of overlap between the library technology people and the cataloging and metadata divisions. And so I'm just interested in seeing what comes of that, and maybe I'll be sucked back in and become more involved and find a place there. But there's also a library history roundtable, which I just discovered like 2 years ago. I never knew existed, and I'm getting really into library history, and I'm like, well, maybe this is a place for me in ALA. But I would say MLA by far has been the best experience I've had with a library association, because I get to meet so many people that I want. I'm again working at Minitex. I'm not in a library, and just some of the groups that I've joined, I've been able to work with all types of library people I would never normally interact with. So I find a lot of value in that, and including Anne and Olivia, I've been on groups with both of them at different times. So yeah, as far as on the digital library side, there's a Google group that I find value in. It's the Digital Curation Google group. Not super active, but there's always like tricky preservation questions that are being answered on that. So that's one that I follow. Yeah, that's all that comes to mind right now.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm looking at the questions, and we appear to be halfway through the question list, yet 3/4 of the way through the time. So I'm thinking we're not going to hit them all. So I'm going to start skipping around if you guys are following along on your computers, just so you know. The next one I want to make sure that we hit is the one where we look a little bit at the future. So tell us what you see as the future for your job in the library world. Is it here to stay? Is it going to be changed? Are you worried that you're going to be phased out someday and replaced by robots, or whatever the case may be? Just talk to me about the future and what you're thinking for your particular job. Carmen.
Well, I don't know. Today, I'm not worried about my job being phased out. I think metadata offers so much flexibility that you always need to have somebody there to try to wrangle it all together and organize it. And since our standards are always changing and the way that people want to display things can always change, you kind of need somebody there that can work with that. Plus, the amount of data that we have to work with is just so huge that we just don't have the systems in place, the technology in place, or whatever. It's not there to automate everything. So, and even if you automate things, you still need people to help with that automation. So, I don't know. I'm in a good place.
That's good. That's good to hear. I think bright future for you.
I hope so. That's my plan. We'll see if it works out that way, but that's my plan.
Excellent. And Sarah?
Oh man, I'm not great at forecasting the future, but I still feel pretty positive as far as the staff in our field. We will be needed, I believe, in the future, because there's just always metadata work to do, and we've sort of touched on this, but the job is never done necessarily. And if we look at like how the web of data is evolving, and to stay relevant, that libraries, we're having to make sure that people can find us right out there, even on the web. So the people that are making that happen are the cataloging and metadata people and systems people, because we're not quite there yet. It's still difficult for things like search engines to find and understand our data in much of the formats that it's in. So I feel like there's some job security there, but it's also a lot of the time the work that we do is behind the scenes, and people don't necessarily know what we do until there's a problem, or so I think the challenge is making our value clear as much as we can to the people who fund us. And I mean, I've been getting more involved in the library legislative side of things, and that's one area I want to get better at. I want to get better at advocating, because I think we should always be advocating as much as we can, because like I said, a lot of the work we do is behind the scenes. And so that's all I got.
Well, that's great. David.
Well, bless you, Sarah, for doing that, because as someone with social anxiety, advocacy work terrifies me. So thank you for doing that. What immediately came to mind was, oh God, the 1950s film Desk Set with Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. And the panic that the premise, the panic of that forms the premise of the film, and ultimately the purpose of technology, as Spencer Tracy finally, which he should have led with, why he's doing this is to free them up to actually do the work of working with users, instead of doing all the work of looking things up, of transcribing, of doing some of the coding work. So what I see is more along the lines of automation, not necessarily replacing everything that we do, but taking over some of those things that take so much time out of our day for cataloging. I also see some potential decentralization of moving away from some of the larger parent organizations like Library of Congress, possibly to an extent OCLC, of librarians, catalogers creating more of their own solutions, sort of this DIY culture. Yeah, beyond that, I can't think of anything else I would add that Carmen and Sarah haven't already talked about. I'm optimistic.
Well, that's good. Good to know. So let's talk briefly about the pandemic. How has it changed your job? And how do you see this impacting your job in the future? Are things going to be changing on a permanent basis, or are you just crossing your fingers until it all goes back to the way it was? David.
Oh boy. How has it not changed my job? It's forced us and me to look at what our priorities are, and kind of the shape of what libraries have to offer. Thinking about more resource access rather than more resources. Because I can't work with the physical collection as much as I would like to, that forces me into more of the catalog work of working with enhancements, which is what I would like to do more of. But yeah, really, to sum up, it's learning how to do more with less right now. That's been across the board at St. Kate's in the library. That's what we've had to do, and I think it's a good thing. Kind of paring down. We're Marie Kondoing how we think about what we do.
Thank you. Marie Kondo, boy, she must just be loving this pandemic, right? I feel like a lot of people point to her in this time, like simplify everything. So this is pandemic is a boon for her. Sarah.
As far as how it's changed my job, a lot of the work I do currently can be done remotely, because we're working with so many digital resources already through the Minnesota Digital Library. But when I've done a little thinking about the future, because and I am a little worried, because we are rethinking. I agree what David said, and trying to, which I think is a good thing, and maybe simplifying. But at the same time, I worry, like, okay, what's the state budget going to look like, and how is that going to trickle down to public libraries? And then how is that going to affect the rest of the library community and within academic libraries? I've just been hearing from all types of libraries that are looking at, having to cut costs, and a little worried and on what the future holds. But but at the same time, on the positive side, I coming back to what David was saying, I found that, like, we just did a virtual conference, and it was our first big virtual conference we've done at Minitex. We did a smaller one years ago that I was involved in, and we do virtual training all the time, but this was kind of the first big virtual conference. And it's the Upper Midwest Digital Collections Conference, and we do that in person every 2 years, and it's like a regional conference. But this year, since we had to cancel the Minnesota Digital Library annual meeting, they meet once a year, also part of Minitex. But those two audiences overlap quite a bit, right? I mean, you've got Minnesota Library and archives and museums that attend that conference, and then you've got the Upper Midwest Digital Collections Conference, where mostly the library community, but they're all working on digital projects. And so, yeah, that makes sense that we would combine those two groups, right? And let's try it. And so we were able to try that. And we usually get between 100 and 130 that come to our conference usually. And this year we had 623. So it's kind of crazy. Like, I would call that successful, and we reached more people. We lose a little bit, the value of what you get from in-person conferences, those like hallway conversations and things like that. But, it was no cost. And so there's things like that, we're rethinking where I work, that I see a lot of value in, but I'm still worried about funding and libraries in general and what the future holds. So
I can understand that. I know personally, and I'm sure there are some students listening, I've been a little worried about students who are in library school right now. What kind of future are they facing? And with all the changes that we can't anticipate, I mean, I don't know. I hope they're prepared for what's coming next. So, Carmen.
Yeah, I would say really the only thing that has kind of changed with my position is just where I am physically located. I'm able to do my job 100% remotely. So and my home setup is almost identical to what my work setup is. So I really feel like nothing's changed for me, except that I just, walk upstairs to start work, and I don't have to sit in traffic while I get to and from campus. But I know that that's not something that I'm going to be able to sustain when we are able to be back at the university in a more normal capacity. So my future for me looks like a very flexible schedule, one where I'm still in the office the majority of the time and on campus the majority of the time, because I know that that's healthy for my department and for the collaboration that we all have within that. But I'm also going to try to keep some of these benefits that I've come to really enjoy by working at home. And so trying to find a balance between the two.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. There are few left on here, two left that I definitely want to make sure we hit. So we'll start with those and see how much time we have left then. So one is give me a story from your job. And it can be anything. It can be something shocking or something funny or something terrifying. Whatever you feel is you want to share, but something that really just stands out to you that happened on your job that you want to share with us. Tell us a story. You're all searching. I can see it on your faces. What story am I going to tell? And it looks to me like Carmen has one, so I'm going to let her go first.
Well, I mean, for me, it's kind of just been, I feel like there's two kinds of librarians that I've come across. There's, in a way, the kind of stereotypical librarian that you think of when somebody says, oh, you're a librarian. You have that vision. And then you have the ones that are trying to break that stereotype and are trying to point out that there's a different kind of person that's in that field. And I feel like those two kinds of people are always the ones that are having the disagreements about how to set up a policy or how to, especially in the cataloging world, it's like the ones who have been in it for a long time and have seen a lot of change with it have a lot of knowledge that they want to bring to you, but then they're also very stuck in the way that they do things. And so then you have somebody like me who's very much a yes and person, not a no but. And so those conversations can get a little heated sometimes because you're both very passionate and you both just want to do what's best for the patron, but in some cases they can be two completely different things. We're very spicy in the library world, I have to say.
I like that. We are very spicy. Sarah.
So I was trying to think of like a fun story. When we used to do more in-person workshops, we used to travel quite a bit, and especially in North Dakota, South Dakota, from the Twin Cities. And so we've hit everything. I feel like we've hit snowstorms, we've traveled through a lot, but it's been fun. Like I've really, especially traveling to those state library conferences in North and South Dakota, because, sometimes we're driving for 6-8 hours and you really get to know your coworkers in that time. But one thing that was really fun, I remember the trip, I think we drove, I want to say we drove from Rapid City and then drove back to the Twin Cities. And this was just a couple of years ago. And we were driving and listening to music, and we were kind of sick of listening to music. And my colleague and I decided to create kind of on the fly, like a bad lyrics playlist. And so we're trying to think of songs that had just like the worst lyrics you could think of throughout time. And so we ended up like having like the best road trip ever, because think about, the songs you grew up with. For me, it was 80s, 90s. For her, it was like 90s and 2000s. But we just had a blast. And then I ended up with this horrible bad lyrics playlist that I'll forever have. So lots, you can probably think in your head right now of some yourself, but that was, so stuff like that. I've always loved the road trip part of my job when we used to do in-person workshops, and now it's mostly virtual. Right now it's all virtual, but yeah.
I'm just going to say, because I'm a moderator and I can, as soon as you started telling that story, I thought "I'm Too Sexy" by Right Said Fred. It was the first
I think that's actually
popped into my head, and now that's going to be like an earworm all night. It is on there. Of course it is. Those lyrics are terrible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. David.
As a former music major, focused on vocal music, I listen to the lyrics of the songs. Most 90% of the songs, they're garbage. The one thing that comes to mind is at the end of this past semester, we lost one of our student workers who worked specifically with technical services. She was dedicated to our department. And she was, it was a little scary, her memory, just the things that she knew and the things that she could do just at sight. Like, she could tell you where a particular invoice was from 2 months ago and what was on it, and what order had been completed, what items were missing. And none of us knew how she did what she did. We knew, like, she's gonna have it. Like, the department is going to run because she knows where everything is. So she graduated this past spring, and my colleague in CERC and I have been scrambling the last couple of months over the summer of figuring out, okay, what did she do? How did she do it? Is that written down somewhere? Is that in a book? Is that in a binder? Is that somewhere on our drive? So it's been this frantic farce, running back and forth, slamming doors, of trying to figure out how to basically replicate what she did with the with the workforce that we currently have. It's been fun.
Well, sounds like she's a resource that you're definitely missing.
She's getting so many letters of recommendation, whatever she wants.
Wow. All right, let's do this one. This question actually came up in the very first panel we ever did. A panelist, an attendee asked this, and I thought, what a great question, and added it to the list. And it is, what didn't you learn in library school that you wish you did? Such a great question. And let's start with Sarah this time.
I was hoping you wouldn't, but because I don't actually have a great response for this one, because it was 2004 was the last time I was in library school, and I actually felt like I got really well-rounded, took some really interesting courses, and so I mean, I couldn't think of anything that was like lacking, that I was like, why didn't I learn about that? Because I feel like in my position, it's just part of my job that I have to keep up and learn what's next and what's the latest thing. So I didn't have a great response for that one.
That's okay. And may I say, well done, UW-Madison. Carmen.
I would say, and part of me, now listening to Sarah's response, now I'm like, oh crap, maybe there was something in my curriculum that I didn't realize that this class was offered, and I just never took it. But my answer had to do with project management. I have an undergrad in human resource management, so I had taken courses on, group work and how to work with difficult people and those, and how to manage a project. So I had that kind of information in my head, but I don't remember off the top of my head if in graduate school there was anything to kind of offer that from a data standpoint. There might have been stuff if you were working with reference, or if you wanted to go to do some sort of management role, but from just the metadata standpoint, I don't think there was anything like that. So I would say project management, and how you work with all the people you're going to meet and all the library communities that you're going to work with, because the way you work with patrons in a public library setting is very different than the way you work with patrons in an academic setting. And so helping bridge those gaps, I think, would have been really helpful.
Thank you. And I will say, I've now asked at least 21 librarians this question, and project management has come up many times. So I hope library schools are taking note. David.
Oh, I would second that about project management. That would have been so helpful. So many instances in my career. But the one thing that I wish I had focused more on, or made more room for in my curriculum, was databases and systems. I really focused on the information side rather than the science side. And part of that comes from my insecurity as a liberal arts major. I'm afraid of technology, math and coding, like, it's not for me, and I do the music. But that is, talking about the future, that is the future of cataloging and metadata management. You can't, you have to know things like SQL in order to write a query. You need to know regular expressions. And that is a course I wish they would have taught at St. Kate's, is one on that. So I'm slowly working my way forward, and I'm taking advantage of Library Juice Academy as much as I can.
Great, very helpful. All right, we do only have just a few minutes left. Is there anything that any of you, I know I did skip a few questions, so maybe you had some point that you really wanted to make or make sure that was heard, or just anything at all that we did not address that you would like to share with our panelists or our attendees, excuse me. And to our attendees, if you have any final questions, now would be the time to type them in. We only have 4 minutes left. And anyone who has a comment, feel free.
Yeah, I would just say with my journey, even though I knew I wanted to get into cataloging, I had to start in circulation. I started in a completely different area than where I've ended up. When I say I had to start from the ground up, I had to start from the ground up to get to where I wanted to go. And I don't think that's uncommon. So just keep at it. And if I can do it, you can do it too.
That's great, Carmen. Thank you.
I'll jump onto what Carmen just said. It's not an exaggeration to say, it's who you know. Take advantage of, I'm assuming that everyone has to do at some point an internship. Take advantage of those. Make that internship experience, tailor that to what you want to do. And then keep in touch with the people who you interned with your site supervisors, the people that you meet there. You never know what opportunities are going to arise from that. So make use of every opportunity that you can to network.
Thank you. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'll just say one thing, expanding on that a little bit, is I've been really impressed when I see library school students, especially who appear at like library events, like even Library Legislative Day. We've had groups appear and just, sometimes I think it may have been part of a class, but so I'm all, as David was saying, I mean, start attending as many of those free library events as you can, and I know it's hard to meet new people. I still hate walking into a room and not knowing who's going to be there, and that always impresses me. And if I was a hiring authority, I'd be like, that's the person that I'd be looking out for if they were applying, So.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm going to quickly share that title screen one more time, just so you can all see those upcoming dates. And then again, that evaluation link, although I will remind you that I'm going to send out the evaluation link as well as all of the links that were shared in the chat today to all of our attendees. So please be on alert for that. I want to thank all of our panelists. You guys were fantastic. I don't know about you, but I think this flew right by. I was having so much fun talking to all of you. And Anne usually likes to say thank you as well. So Anne?
I do like to say thank you. I appreciate your willingness to be on this panel, for us to meet new people that we haven't known in the past. I would say that Metronet is a great opportunity particularly once we get back to face-to-face opportunities for networking. Olivia and I are always at those events, so you'll at least know us. And we're more than happy to introduce you to everybody we know. So take advantage of that. And yesterday was our board meeting, and the board agreed to continue the expenditure of the Lars Stelzner scholarship funds for either for ALA midwinter or other upcoming online, or if you're brave, in-person events. But online events will pay the registration fee. So you'll be able to see that information in Metro Briefs on Monday. But take that into consideration. It's for new librarians, fewer than 5 years in the profession, library school students, recently unemployed. There's another category or two. You do need to live in the Metronet region, however. So the other thing we've been talking about is, because we see this list of registrants, then maybe we need to issue a badge or something for our loyal attendees who have been to so many of them. So keep an eye out for that too, or if you have an idea about that, we'd be happy to. And we'll always give you an attendance certificate if you need one. Anyway, thanks again.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming.
Stay
Yeah.
safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anne or Olivia, if you have a minute, I just want to tell you one thing if you don't have to run.
I don't have to run.
We
Okay.
do have a minute. Give me 1 second.